Hi there, Megan Thompson here with Megan Thompson Coaching, and today we are going to focus on a reintroduction. We have had a slew of new followers lately and on all of our platforms, and so I figured it was time for us to spend a great deal together on this show, understanding more about what we do, what we stand for here at MTC, and to speak more about my personal story as to what got me into this work in the first place. And I will do that at the end so that you can understand more about our principles here at MTC if you're already familiar with my personal story. So what I want to do at first is just introduce the core principles and mission of MTC and what we do here for families of highly sensitive kids. And our main mission is to eliminate suicidal thoughts and actions for highly sensitive people around the world by teaching parents to stop the meltdown cycle playfully in their household. So what we know and what the research demonstrates that stemmed from Marsha Linehan's research that started in the 1960s and has continued with some of her followers and researchers that have branched off from her work on DBT, that some people were born with sensitive nervous systems and some people developed sensitive nervous systems based on their trauma history. And those people, when they grow up in a chronically invalidating environment, they can develop risky, life-threatening behaviors like chronic suicidality, which means multiple attempts in and out of the hospital, chronic self-harm, and chronic risky behavior. So chronic just means that it's happening more frequently, it's cyclical, and a person doesn't break out of that cycle. Now, Marsha Linehan developed dialectical behavior therapy for treating the needs that adults with this cyclical behavior demonstrate. And then she moved from just applying her treatment to adults and studied and researched the focus on adolescents. So early in my clinical career, and I'm a licensed clinical professional counselor and a registered play therapist supervisor, I was blessed with the opportunity to attend train the trainer trainings that allowed me to understand DBT at a deep level. This is an evidence-based treatment that I was trained in pretty early in my career, around year 4 or 5 postmasters, and I applied this learning in government systems and then in a nonprofit residential treatment centers, so locked door facilities for adolescents. I ran the facility for a year and a half in that facility before I went on to full-time private practice and worked in a group private practice for a while before I opened up my own company. And in my own private practice that I ran for 5 years, I also only worked with adolescents through this model when adolescents were demonstrating chronic self-harm and suicidal actions and risky behaviors like engaging in fights or risky sexual behaviors, promiscuity, putting themselves in really difficult or dangerous situations, engaging in behaviors that would lead to grooming or trafficking incidences based on addiction to screens and things like that. So parents would seek us out in the community because their children were engaging in very difficult and dangerous behaviors. And we solely used evidence-based treatment in our work. And I had a clinical team that we invested to send them through that training, and they were only allowed to treat when they had the specific training, especially related to DBT, which takes hours and hours and months to digest and learn and understand. So our clinic that I ran was a teaching clinic. We would bring interns in, we would bring new clinicians in, and we would teach them my way. So in terms of that, obviously they would learn the evidence-based treatment to work with the most intense cases, and those cases for young clinicians were shared with older clinicians. We never had young clinicians work with cases that were pretty severe without oversight and also co-treatment with a more experienced clinician. And that was really critical, and it speaks to my story, and I'll tell more about that in terms of my family's experiences with the mental health industry. And I think that it's important to understand that one of our principles here is that no child was put on this earth to be miserable, and sensitive people who engage in life-threatening behaviors are absolutely miserable, of course, right? So in order to break out of that pattern, following the research and doing exactly what the research demonstrates, and doing this in a way that helps people see a clinician's personality, so the clinician isn't a robot, was critical. And so we only focused on doing one thing really, really well. And we also served highly sensitive kids before they got to that point in clinical therapy. And we worked with sensitive children and their parents together with an evidence-based treatment for young children and the parent-child relationship. So this is something that I had learned for years. I have over almost 15 years of clinical experience, having a license since 2011, something like that. And in that respect, it's been 15 years. I'm not going to do the math at this point. This recording is 2024. I'm doing the math incorrectly. Let's focus on the history instead. You guys can do the math. So my clinical experience is 15 years post-master's, not post-licensure. That's not what I usually share. So anywho, what I want to focus on at this point is understanding all of my clinical experience has brought us to MTC. We've been running MTC since 2018, which means that there was certainly some overlap in running both the coaching and consulting company and my prior private practice. And so where we teach parents to help their children eliminate daily meltdowns in as little as 8 weeks is, and how we do that is based on our clinical experience and training, interns, green therapists, as well as working directly with parents for a very long time. Because one of the things that we teach our parents is that you don't need another master's degree to parent your child. And so being able to clearly and specifically teach how to understand your child's emotional intensity and how to pace yourself in parenting without moving into overconsumption of information and overconsumption of differential diagnostic information can support you as a parent in understanding your role, understanding your child effectively, without slapping a label that is undue or learning too much that can lead to confusion, analysis paralysis. Simplicity is the path to mastery. When we think about feeling empowered for parenting sensitive kids, that is critical. So again, a lot of my training was both in play therapy and trauma-focused therapy, as well as with the dialectical therapy intensives that I've done over the years. And those are all Linehan-based, not any other lesser quality service that tends to take a lower intense spin-off of Linehan's protocols. For those of you who follow me that have more of a clinical background, we have 70% of our clients are teachers, doctors, nurses, therapists. So you might have heard of Marsha Linehan, so that's what I'm speaking about that. But what we're talking about is what we do now, right? And what we do now here at MTC and what we've been doing for the last 6 years online is serving parents to stop the meltdown cycle on their own so that you can help your sensitive child exist fully in your household without feeling chronically overwhelmed, without feeling chronically stuck or frustrated or exasperated, and without falling into the trap of dreading your days with your children, Monday morning quarterbacking the end of the night, figuring out where you went left when you should have gone right, having the entire time that you're spending with your spouse just focusing on what you could do better tomorrow, communicating with your kiddo what they could do better tomorrow, and just waiting and holding space for them in managing their big emotions. All of this takes so much time, and it sucks the life out of what family is for. Family is for enjoyment, collaboration, growth, challenge, but not at this level of intensity. Losing your mind on a daily basis is very, very difficult for your child, and can feel quite traumatic for children, highly sensitive or not. So every family is living in fight or flight or frustration or overwhelm, and the nervous system is on high alert. So what we do is we teach parents in layman's terms the concepts of epigenetics, that your child experiences a more sensitive nervous system, and how that presents to the world is impacted by how they are raised. And so when you start to think that your child's personality is aggressive, bossy, shy, or any other negative label that focuses on the behaviors that you see right now when your child is in a meltdown cycle, you will parent your child based on that presumption. My child won't follow my directions. My child is quote unquote strong-willed, right? So all of those labels that you're speaking into your child actually keep your child stuck in the meltdown cycle, because you are characterizing your child's personality based on their current behavior presentation, and their current behavior presentation is in suffering. They are currently suffering with the lack of skill that they are able to demonstrate in managing their big emotions. So they are not showing up as their true self, as their playful, creative, curious, problem-solving, spontaneously affectionate self, especially not as the dominant presentation of how they behave in the world. What you see is some of that, pockets of it, or some parents come to us and they say, well, the school gets to see that behavior, but I don't see that. My child is a quote unquote perfect angel at school, and the teachers would be blindsided or dumbfounded that my child really struggles at home and is demonstrating more of a Jekyll and Hyde personality in their lives. And what we teach parents to understand is that your child is actually not doing well in school. They are stuffing their emotions. They are just presenting and putting on a pretty face for school. And that is a people-pleasing behavior. And sensitive people, whether the nervous system was born sensitive, like the genotype for plasticity, which is a multitude of genes that a person has in their DNA, sensitivity from the personality trait, which is called sensory processing sensitivity. It has been found in DNA research. It's also true that it's not necessary for you to go down the rabbit hole of getting your kids' blood tested. What you can observe is the symptoms of the meltdown cycle. When sensitive kids get stuck in them, they demonstrate some pretty clear behavior problems: shutting down, hitting, kicking, screaming on a daily or weekly, multiple times a week basis, multiple times a day basis. And the root cause is all the same for kids like this. And the important piece is whether or not your child has a genotype that fits that, or they have developed a genotype because of a past trauma, is actually not necessarily relevant for you to learn how to parent effectively. Because what we teach parents is a certain level of parenting and an approach to parenting that does not need to dive into the root cause for the nervous system overload, because the nurturing of the child's nervous system in the household can actually change how the child presents in the world. And this is research demonstrated and backed up by countless studies. And so when parents get stuck in trying to figure out what's going on with our children, the vast majority of our clients, their children have not had traumatic experiences, or they've had a small trauma, what would be considered in trauma talk, a little t trauma. So house fire, though scary, wasn't chronic, right? Any other sort of natural disaster or single incident trauma, car crash, witness to home invasion, things like this. So though scary is not the cause of the child's sensitive nervous system. Impacted by the traumatic experience for sure, but not the cause. So this is our clientele, and the families that we work with fit the criteria for this dynamic. And when this happens, when a child has a more sensitive nervous system, they may be considered neurodivergent. They may be considered to fit the criteria for ADHD as well as the sensitivity in terms of their processing. So sensory processing disorder or sensory processing sensitivity, or both. All of these have the same root cause as the sensitive nervous system. Okay, so the nervous system is how the brain impacts the nerves inside the body, how the emotional intensity is experienced inside the body, and also the amount of information the brain takes in from the world. And why that is could be because the child is hypervigilant, because they experienced a multitude of scary events, and they are focused on making sure they keep track of any possible danger, or they are on high alert because they don't know how to regulate their naturally sensitive nervous system. So we see children who have a naturally sensitive nervous system demonstrate similar behavior, where a clinician who's treating that child in a one-on-one session is asking parents, are you sure your kid didn't experience trauma? And this is the puzzle that a lot of clinicians get stuck in, not being able to put it all together, because the piece that is missing is how parents are relating to their kids, and such a drastic change that sensitive children can make when parents have more effective skills to then teach their child the skills. And so when we look at the plasticity research that especially Boyce has published over the years, what we can observe is that sensitive children demonstrate much more effective skills and can perform in their lives and function in their lives above and beyond their peers. So what I want to do is take a minute and share a graph that I've used in multiple resources that I've published over the years, whether that be on past trainings or in our ebook for parents who are eliminating the meltdown cycle. And I'm going to do that here right now. So give me just a minute to pull that up. So you see here on this chart, what we're able to notice is that the emotion regulation skills of sensitive children actually change based on the parenting quality. So when the quality of the relationship improves for sensitive children who are more plastic to their environment, so plastic, the scientific word meaning moldable, when you heat it up, you can mold plastic, right? So that's the term is the plasticity genotype, means that sensitive kids are more moldable by their parenting environment than non-sensitive kids. So what we can see is that sensitive children who have 4 or 5 plasticity alleles, so parts of their DNA that indicate that they are more moldable, there's more than one allele in the DNA sequence that indicates that. There's hundreds at this point that they've been able to identify in research. And 4 or 5 is all you need to really clearly have a drastic shift in your presentation, your personality, your behavior when parents change the parenting. So that's why our results happen so quickly for parents, because we just follow the research and we work with parents whose kids are more plastic. So it might seem a little too good to be true in terms of what we teach, that clinicians or other professionals have told you that this is going to take years for your kids to turn this around. We had a conversation with a parent the other day that her husband's clinician, so he's been in therapy for years, said, "Oh yeah, I have a kid like that, and you're just going to need to keep him in therapy till he's in college, and then he'll eventually figure it out." And that's bogus. And the reason behind that is when you change the way that you parent, your kids can actually move from 2-3 standard deviations away from the mean. We see here on this end of the research. Let me see if I can get my finger going the right way if you're watching this show. So the level of self-control and regulation of sensitive children is very low, okay? and it's very low on this chart here. And when parenting quality is 3 standard deviations away from the mean. So in a refresher for you on college statistics or high school statistics is that if you're parenting inequality in terms of how you feel connected to your kid, how you understand your kid, and whether or not you know how to effectively validate your kid, if more parents than if 97% of parents feel more connected than you do, your child's behavior in terms of self-control and self-regulation will perform on the lower end of that cycle. They will perform with less control and less regulation compared to 97% of the population. All right. So what that means is that they are in the lowest 3% of behavior control and behavior regulation. And this is purely due to a mismatch in parenting for you. So I am not saying that you need to be abusing your child or neglecting your child to fall into this 3 standard deviations away from the mean. And that is a hard pill to swallow. And it's also true that when you change this dynamic and you move into a above the average parent connection with your kid, your child, you can see here, will thrive, right? Above. And so I'm not great at these, at the orientation of the screen. So just follow me along. You can see the chart go all the way up to the top. Okay. This darkest line demonstrates that sensitive children perform above and beyond their peers. And when parenting quality changes, it's just science. That's it. We're just looking at the miracle of studying how parents change their dynamic and watching the children learn to thrive. And one of the things that we understand as parenting specialists here, and mental health specialists and educational specialists and occupational specialists here at MTC, is that your relationship to your child is what is most impactful to your child's behavior and their sense of self-control and their sense of self-regulation. So I have an entire show related to the research and a research review on that that we produced early spring of 2024. So go ahead and comment below wherever you find this show, or email us at mt@meganthompsoncoaching.com if you would like access to that, so you can do your own deep dive with me on another training. But what I want to focus on is the understanding that your kiddo can change quickly. And so no child was born on this earth to be miserable. You are the therapeutic change agent for your child. You are the perfect parent for your child, and your child will only change when you change. And those are our core beliefs. And this is based on the understanding as well as the observation that 1.4 million children in the United States alone fit the criteria for an anxiety diagnosis today, and 20% of children fit the criteria for sensitive kids in today's society based on the latest research. Other anecdotal reports will say that that number is higher, but I'm going to just focus on the facts that is in publishing right now. And when we look at that number, 1.4 million kids with anxiety diagnoses, what we know about anxiety is that anxiety is contagious. That means that the family household is feeding off of each other when a child is anxious, and the children are not the cause of the anxiety in the household. They are they are experiencing a side effect. That is important. Children are raised by parents. You don't raise a child in a vacuum. A child is not raising themselves. That means that parents are either perpetuating, enabling, or impacting the child's capacity to demonstrate anxiety and to live in an anxious mind. So we teach the freedom for parents to break out of this pattern. And we help parents achieve that clarity, that calm, and to avoid punishing and more traditional perspectives. So we don't teach timeouts, we don't teach spankings, we don't teach yelling, we don't teach taking away privileges as manipulation to control behavior. Instead, what we teach are more natural consequences to not save or enable children, and then teach parents how to stop their child's brain orientation for danger. So children start to hyper focus on the worst case scenario or all the bad things that happened to them today, and they start to tell parents of their negativity ledger and look at the world as glass half empty and through gray colored glasses. And naturally, children are optimistic, which means that children who are stuck are not presenting in their naturally born way of being. And that means that children are influenced and are more effectively influenced towards their naturally born optimism when parents change how to teach kiddos. So again, this is not your fault. You have been working very hard, I am sure, at turning this around. And traditional gentle parenting or attachment focused parenting, child development, positive parenting, whatever you want to label it, is not effective at stopping the meltdown cycle. It's insufficient. So sure, it's great to validate your kids. It's great to help your kids see that you understand where they're coming from. And if there is not a nuance to that, your child will still feel chronically invalidated, which is where that mismatch in parenting is coming from. And this is language that Marsha Linehan has been using for decades. It's not my language. It is language that I've been using since I've been running this business online and have been focusing on for the last six plus years at this point. However, it is not my term. So when we focus on the science, when we really focus on what helps sensitive kids, we can change the family dynamic and you can feel more empowered as a parent. So this is what we do, and how we do it is through a multitude of ways. We have resources for parents whose children are experiencing meltdowns because of a traumatic event or chronic trauma, because that is not the best fit for our signature services. I've written a book for parents who can learn how to vet and appropriately utilize mental health therapy for families who have experienced that. We also meet criteria for parents who might not be able to engage in our more intensive services. And so I have a small course for that, or a more financially digestible personal development subscription service for parents. That's called REI, Resilience Empowerment Institute. If parents are the only ones who are able to address the mindset of what's going on in the home, or maybe you realize that your sensitive kid, you're following me because your sensitive kid doesn't have meltdowns or shutdowns or explosions at this point, and you want to keep it that way and you want to develop yourself, then REI is a good fit for you. And then what you've likely heard us speak about for quite some time is at my signature program. This is the program that I've been running for 6 years. I had the bare bones workshop focus on in the clinical practice that we added to the evidence-based treatment we used in therapy. And then we also served parents of sensitive kids in solely boot camp through our coaching practice for many years before we started to add year-long masterminds to our work. And that program is called Boot Camp. So this is where we teach parents of highly sensitive kids to eliminate daily meltdowns in as little as 8 weeks through a systematic process that breaks down the root causes of the meltdown cycle for the entire family. And we start to hone playfully the capacity for families to feel much more connected and to have children follow parents' leads without using empty threats or manipulation or feeling drained or exhausted, so that the household feels more jovial, more harmonious, and more collaborative. And children learn how to creatively solve their own problems by facing challenges from a resilient mindset. And this is applied through our resilience rewiring protocol that is trademarked and we apply in our course material. So that is the gamut of the work that we do in terms of entry points for parents to work directly with us and in our process. So at this point, what I'll do is I'll explain to you more about how and why MTC came to be, and that is related to my personal story in and how I became the expert that I am on this subject. And I will explain that to you at this point. So I started to learn more about the sensitive trait when I joined the training that I mentioned earlier in today's talk. And so at that point, I had a major aha moment that sensitivity as a an inborn genetic experience was the reason why my sister was struggling so much and why we had such emotional intensity in our household growing up. And that plus the combination of a mismatched parenting style from my parents, and where my parents didn't have the skills, my sister exclaimed from the rooftops the emotional intensity that not having those emotion management skills led to. So I want to speak a little bit about the dynamic that we experienced growing up and how that led to me to wanting to be a therapist based on my own psychoanalysis of myself over the years, and how that came to be. So grab your cup of coffee, join me on this journey to learn a little bit more about my personal story, because I'm not sure how long I'll go on at this point. You'll see before me. So I was the oldest of three. I'm the oldest of three, and my sister's 2 years younger than me, and then I have a brother who's 6. We're 6 years apart. And my sister was sensitive pretty early on. We knew she was having meltdowns with socks. She was demonstrating what would be considered shyness, inhibition around men. I remember specifically swimming pool meltdowns because of a male instructor. Fear was pretty prevalent in terms of her natural inclination to the world, and that was a difficult experience for my parents, because my mom didn't know how to support her without falling into the more traditional way of encouraging her and then ripping off the Band-Aid. So yeah, it's going to be fine, reassuring, yep, see, this will be fine, and then kind of pushing her into the experience. So it was the 80s and 90s. There's no blame. There's no make wrong here. The understanding of emotional intelligence and emotion regulation skills just wasn't something that came naturally to my parents based on how they were raised and the generational trauma that they were working on overcoming. And so they were doing the very best that they could with the information they had at hand. And on the surface, one would presume that my parents were parenting pretty well based on the 80s and 90s application of parenting. So spanking very occasionally, using soap in the mouth for naughty language, and timeout chairs were the vast majority of the typical parenting tactics, as well as writing lines for ineffective behavior and being sent to our rooms. And so I'm pretty sure my parents stopped spanking with me and my sister. I don't think they ever spanked my brother. And yet the parenting assumption at that time was that a child's behavior made a parent's emotional intensity harder and more intense. So the message we received was, your behavior has thus disappointed us, or your behavior has thus made us angry. And mom was a stay-at-home parent for a lot of the younger years for me and for my brother and sister. So that was her full-time job. And the message we received in the lectures was, I got angry because you did X, Y, Z, right? So there was a misappropriation for how much power the child had in the household for the adult's emotional intensity. And the temperament that my mom learned from her parents was one to be an Irish yeller, okay? So redheads have temper was the message that just got passed down from generation to generation. And myself included received that message, and I also presented as a yeller, as an angry kid, as an angry teenager, and an explosive young adult. And that intensity was laughed off, was dismissed, but then also shamed and lectured against when I was a teenager, and laughed off for the adults. So, or dismissed mainly. I don't think my parents were doing too much making light of that, but it was mom's behavior was contingent on the parents' behavior. So this is common. This is common in today's day and age in terms of a lot of parents saying that they wouldn't need to get angry if their kids weren't misbehaving. It's common in the last generation of parenting, because emotional intelligence skills and emotional regulation skills are hard to learn, and generational patterns are hard to break. So it is something that you likely resonate with. It's something likely that you're probably experiencing, and you're invited to break out of that pattern yourself. We have a lot of our clients who say that they don't want to parent the way that they were parented, and they love their parents very much, as do I. And my parents know what I do for a living. And they are very happy and pleased and grateful that I do what I do, so that other families don't need to suffer like my family has and is in terms of the dynamic of what we are dealing with in our loved ones and with my sister, and the struggles that she has. So the understanding around that is that the emotional intensity that a sensitive kid has isn't one that is grown out of, or that can be kind of pushed out of through stricter parenting, or punishing parenting, or lecturing parenting, or over-explaining parenting. Lecturing is actually an emotion regulation side effect for parents who don't have emotion regulation skills. They will fall into lecturing just like they will fall into yelling. So it actually creates a false sense of relief. It is not a parenting tactic. And so and this was something that I had to learn myself, because I was lecturing my partners in dating years ago before I had kids, and didn't realize that. And until I started to learn and process my own emotions, and hire my own coaches and consultants to teach me that process, because I was never taught that process when I tried to access therapy in my young adulthood. I was instead, my struggle was normalized and validated, but I was not taught direct skills that would have been effective for me to eliminate the behavior, or reduce the behavior, and really taught healthy living skills. So therapy more pervasively is designed to get people out of deep, dark suffering, and then move into generally doing okay enough to match the vast majority of the middle amount of functioning for popular society. Whereas in coaching, and why I resonated more effectively with that, is because I knew I was, God willing, put on this earth to be excellent at what I did, whatever that might be, whatever God needed me to do. And at the time, I didn't really have a relationship with God, but I was being led to do really, really well and perform really, really well. And living in the middle, to me, seemed mediocre. It seemed not good enough. And while the vast majority of the reason why I needed to perform above and beyond my peers was to get external validation, to get accolades, because that's how I was taught my worth was associated when I was younger, that, I get rewarded for good grades, I'd get praised for good grades, good performance, good behavior performance. But there's also an internal drive that I had that wasn't necessarily just taught to me, because we all have an internal drive to do well. And in children have an internal drive to do well, to please, to serve, to offer opportunities to other people, and to collaborate, and to communicate, to keep the community alive. That is an inherent human behavior, because we are social beings. And yet sensitive kids, or non-sensitive kids alike, can move into more isolative, self-serving behaviors when they're not matched with their parenting needs, because they have to take care of themselves. So they start to demonstrate more egocentric behaviors than what's naturally relevant for for children in terms of child development, because children in general are more egocentric naturally, but they can become extremely egocentric where they're not demonstrating their capacity for empathy that we know they have. They're just not acting on it. And this is a common symptom of the meltdown cycle, where parents think that empathy, part of the personality trait of sensitive kids, just is non-existent in their sensitive kids. They start to think that, no, my kid is just super selfish and borderline narcissistic, and that's just not how children are designed. And however, children will behave in that way when they don't feel like their needs can be met. They move into more self-preservation, fear-based behavior. So this was definitely part of my upbringing and in the experience that I had. I would engage in self-preservation behavior as well as self-destructive behavior. So for me, obviously that was rage, and it was also binge drinking. So in college and in grad school, I engaged in that behavior, and by the grace of God, I am alive today based on the behaviors that I exhibited and the risks that I took in young adulthood. I put myself in some pretty dangerous situations, and I was, thank goodness, not victimized beyond just waking up in odd scenarios around the college and grad school, and where I had vacation through spring break and things like that. And I'm very blessed to be here today, and part of my struggle brought me to a closer relationship to God, and to understand that my calling and why I do what I do, I had to go through some of these experiences in order to teach parents to help their children avoid that emotional escapism and that emotional avoidance that I engaged in. And I'm not highly sensitive, so we know that sensitive kids will engage in that too, and also siblings of sensitive kids will learn that skill set to preserve self and to escape emotion. It is a skill set, it is a survival skill set when the whole family is not taught this skill set. So I was put on this earth to not just help parents of sensitive kids, but also the entire family. And this is something that a lot of parent coaches or consultants or even mental health providers will misplace the responsibility of focus, that the sensitive child is the scapegoat in the household and therefore the identified patient, whether the person treating is, clinically appropriately calling this person a patient if it's a psychiatrist or a doctor, or identified client if it's a clinical provider, or the identified client if it's a coach or a parenting coach. Where typically the approach is to look at just the child as the cause or the most intense need, and the only one who needs the skill sets. So what happens is we actually perpetuate the dynamic that for myself and my sister, she was the problem child. She was the black sheep, to the point where my brother and I would joke that she was adopted. She must be adopted. And that was cruel now, right? But in that moment, we were teasing given how befuddled we were in terms of her emotional presentation and how different that presentation was for us, we couldn't understand it. And so we would reject her even in our jokes, which is obviously psychologically damaging to her and damaging to the relationship we had, and damaging to us to treat someone like that for sure as well. It did not help our heart heal or feel good because we were bullying our own sister. And because we didn't have the skills to observe or say to our parents, hey, something's really going on, and none of us know what's going on because we're kids. And in that dynamic, we all just kind of had to fend for ourselves emotionally. And this led to a lot of struggle for all three of us in terms of emotional presentation. So for my sister, she struggled significantly in managing her emotions throughout her adolescence. She became a people pleaser. She was taken advantage of by her peers. I became explosive and was quite rude to her friends because I could see right through them. They were very superficial, and I didn't have communication skills as an adolescent. So my defensiveness and loyalty to my sister came out in criticizing her friends, which obviously drove a wedge in our relationship. And then she also, in early adulthood, when life was entirely hers to manage, she developed anorexia. And while she spent weekends with my parents, coming back home from the city that she was living in, and just needing more support emotionally, and spending the weekends with them, repeating the history of more of a commuter student when she had already graduated from college, she was still demonstrating that failure to launch behavior, and in that my parents didn't see the slow decline of her physical presentation because they saw her so frequently. And when I came home from grad school one summer and I saw that she was skin and bones, I was the one who blew the whistle in the dynamic and said, she's anorexic. And at that point, I was a grad student to become a mental health therapist. And I pulled out my old abnormal psychology book from undergrad because I was studying psychology in undergrad as well. And I pointed to the symptoms to my parents and was like, hi, look at this. She's, we can see her spine, we can see her ribs. This is not appropriate. It was summertime, so it was obvious to me. And yet people weren't really noticing this. And like I said, because I don't know if you've ever heard of that frog in a boiling pot mentality. The myth that a frog will die because if you turn the heat up slowly, the frog starts to get comfortable and all of a sudden gets so hot that it can't actually jump out. It loses the energy to jump out. So while I'm pretty sure that was scientifically misproven, the metaphor of a slow decline is absolutely true in human behavior. That change and decline of functioning doesn't happen drastically overnight. And this is true in the meltdown cycle, right? Your kid had demonstrated meltdowns or shutdowns, and you might have presumed that they were developmentally appropriate when your kid was 3 or 4. And then all of a sudden you wake up to, holy smokes, we've been struggling, and this has been going on for too long, even though we've been trying to turn this around, right? And so that's the emotional intensity that we help parents break out of. And this is a cycle and what makes my team so good at identifying the cycle is that all of us lived that cycle. So my director of coaching, our mindset coach on the team, and our parent success coach who works in our help desk for our boot camp service, all of us as experts in our field have also lived this cycle and have seen firsthand what the cycle does to families when it's not stopped. And so this is part of our mission, is very personal, to not repeat history and to help parents stop this cycle sooner than our family was able to stop it. And so our family of origin, and in that respect, we understand how difficult it is to really create lasting change, and still are capable of doing that. So at this point, I'm close to my 40s, and I have 2 children. I have a sensitive child who's my oldest, and I have she's 8 at the time of this recording, and then I have a 2-year-old. And my oldest kiddo is had meltdowns when she was younger, was very verbally bright and could communicate very quickly, super clever. She's clever as a whip. And we stopped the meltdown cycle in a developmentally appropriate way. So my child grew out of her meltdowns by the time she hit 4, and around age 4, because that's where the developmental target is, that the brain has started to organize itself enough to emotionally express without going into emotional overload and behaving in an out of control manner. And for my daughter, when she was much younger, she also learned how to experience a meltdown without engaging in destructive behavior, like chucking hard toys and things like that. We were able to turn that around. When she was around 2, we had to coach her to only throw stuffed animals and things like that. When she had the urge and the emotional intensity, we were able to redirect her to softer things rather than just whatever was in sight. And so what we teach, and we teach parents effectively, is even when your child is having a meltdown, your child is still present to the moment to be coached, but in a much more targeted, nuanced, and a small way, so that your child's meltdowns can stop in the moment, and you can mitigate risk in the moment, as well as obviously get out ahead of them and stop them altogether, and teach your child to stop the emotional intensity from rising altogether. Because when you stop the meltdown cycle, you're not just working on preventing meltdowns, because your child, if they still pop off, like, for me, it was like the redhead will have a temper, better not make the redhead mad. And that meant that as long as the environment's going well, I'm fine. But that kept me in a shame cycle where I would easily blame other people if you made me mad. And I didn't learn until I was in my clinical internship that no one can make me mad. So that was a huge aha moment. And then I had to learn more effectively what to do about that. And I went to therapy and didn't learn that at all. Instead got shamed. And then hired a coach. And then I started to learn, here's how I'm making assumptions. Here's how I'm perpetuating anxiety for myself. And that was actually much more impactful for me. And so I started to lean more towards, as I mentioned earlier, DBT that has a coaching component to clinical therapy. And then I learned more about coaching as a profession, consultation as a profession, and shifted in that dynamic because I could affect change in the household faster when I focused on parents and developed a process. So back to the experience, my family has been failed by the medical and mental health model within the medical model in multiple ways. I was failed. My sister was failed. I have other loved ones who've battled addiction because they were failed, whereas they went into the mental health industry, received help that was not sufficient, and then later developed addiction behaviors because they were self-medicating, because the mental health therapy they received was not effective and just placating, like my experience. And then we also witnessed suicidality, and I have unfortunately 4 family members or close friends. So 3 are family members. 1 is a close friend's parent who died by suicide or by destructive behavior. My aunt died by a 50-year addiction to heroin. So I've seen it. I've seen it all in terms of destructive behaviors and mental health needs that affect the family line. And I know that in my experience, this is not something that only affects families who have a high level of disorganization. Mental health knows no socioeconomic bounds, and it is something that everybody needs to take seriously and needs to grow into quickly in order to live a thriving life that is not just focused on doing and getting the job done on a daily basis, like going to work and going to sleep and making sure your kids are fed. And that's where a thriving family actually lives. So in my family dynamic, we play, we communicate, the children follow us as joyful and goofy and engaging parents. And my children are much more effective at communicating their emotions because of that. And so while I do obviously practice what I preach, we've helped hundreds of families at this point, thousands if you combine my clinical career with the coaching career, and in changing this dynamic so that joy can be the emotional home. And so I hope that this introduction helps you learn more, not just of me, but also a little bit about my team and why this is so important to us. So if you want more support in breaking out of this pattern, I encourage you to book a call with our team. There's absolutely a way out in this process. Go to meganthompsoncoaching.com/talk. And on that conversation, we will speak about your family's struggles, where you're stuck, what your gaps are, and what patterns of behavior you want to stop, why you are a generational chain breaker, and what is so important about that for you, whether that be that you're not seeing your family of origin skills that you're able to impart to your child, or you don't want your family of origin skills to be imparted to your child, or maybe a combination of both, right? So that your child grows up and lives from their strengths rather than from their challenges. And if that's the case, and your goals align with the results that we can create with our clients, then we tell you how what we do works, and we walk you through the process, and you understand what your options are, and you can get started with us on that same call. However, if our work, like I said, is not the best fit, then we have resources for you to use on your own, or to support and direct you in accessing mental health therapy if that is actually more appropriate for your family. So that conversation is complimentary. It's available to you, and you can certainly access it when you're ready. Go to meganthompsoncoaching.com/talk, and we will talk to you soon. Bye.